I'd like to call the meeting to order at 6 o'clock. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the traditional territories of the Continuum people and acknowledge and honor the lands of the Continuum people. The Continuum people maintain their profound, unique, and spiritual connection to the land through ageless traditions, teachings, stewardships, and expressions of reciprocity. Do we have any additions, deletions, or changes in order to tonight's agenda, please? Seeing none, I call for a motion to approve the agenda. Moved by Trustee McKay and seconded by Trustee Stanley. Oops, forgot. All right. All those in seeing no objections, we shall carry that unanimously. May I get a motion to accept the minutes from the October 6th education meeting, please? Trustee Wilkinson and Trustee McKay, and noted an extension from Trustee Stanley, please. Who she's just noting that she was away. And I just realized that I instinctively went back into the old habit of using titles, and Charlene modeled last week moving away from that a bit. So I think I will take that modeling and move back to putting titles last, and because we are people here, and we are, as a district, we are a family, and we want to focus more on relationships and less on that kind of older kind of colonial structuring. So thank you for your understanding in that. All right, we have no presentations tonight. We have some reports from our staff. Tim Davey, no, is it Tim? I apologize. Yeah, it is Tim. From the Department of Learning Services, we'll start with a report on inclusive education.
Thank you, Tanya, Madam Chair. It's my pleasure actually just to make an introduction. So I'm pleased to be able to introduce Assistant Superintendent Tate, who we're all familiar with, who is presenting on behalf of Director of Instruction Steele and the Learning Services team this evening. And I thank Ms. Tate for being here and sharing with us. And I also wish to acknowledge before the presentations and to welcome our inclusive support team, who continue to conduct such valued work within our schools in support of our students and teachers in the classrooms. And I also wish to thank our presenters from our schools for their willingness to share a glimpse of the great work that's taking place around inclusive practices within our schools. And on behalf of their colleagues here this evening. Having said that, I wish to turn this over to Assistant Superintendent Tate, who is going to introduce our presenters through her presentation this evening. So thank you very much. And Laura, over to you.
Great, thank you so much. Through the chair. Thank you for this opportunity to speak this evening. I would like to draw to your attention the Board of Education goals of continuous improvement of instruction and assessment, and building and maintaining a safe, caring, and healthy learning and working environment that's inclusive of the diversity of our entire learning community. Every child and every adult should be able to show up every day and feel a sense of belonging, a sense of safety, both psychological and physical. When we feel like we belong and we feel cared for, we can all learn at high levels. Levels of data from last time. If you remember last time we were with you in the Education Committee, we used a bit of a metaphor and a book reflective of a book called Street Data. And we talked about the 3 levels of data: satellite data, map data, and street data. So when speaking about inclusive education specifically as a focus this year, I'm going to reflect on these 3 descriptive levels. So way up here at the satellite level, we have leadership. Leadership this year, the focus has primarily been around compassionate systems leadership. Leaders in the systems are checking and rechecking how they're showing up each day. They're reflecting on their core beliefs and their mental models around many things, including inclusive education. When we think about that map level data, I think about capacity building. So the system provides capacity building and support opportunities at all levels district-wide around inclusive education. And then right down at the street level data, we talk about the individual child or the classroom. We have actions in schools and classrooms. And this is where we consider the individual child or individual situation through the lens of inclusive education. More specifically, I'd like to reflect on this fall and school startup. This has been a very different start for us. School teams are reporting a significant increase in the complexity of our learners from previous years. There are a number of factors that are impacting schools at this time. Many families with complex learners have struggled to access resources, supports, and interventions throughout the pandemic. We're also observing that the general sense of that pandemic fatigue that's impacting our broader community is also impacting our schools. We returned to school this fall with an increase in pandemic restrictions from June, and navigating the school day continues to feel very different from before. The continuum of need in many of our classrooms is quite broad due to the diversity in the experiences for learners who are at-home learners over the past year and a half. We're providing more support for social, emotional, and mental health needs than has been required in the previous school years. As you know, that should be familiar. So there's a few other factors which have contributed to the complexities in many schools, and I'm just going to take a quick moment to share a couple of those. Many schools have experienced a significant increase in the number of students with complex needs designations at their sites. While overall English language learners, or ELL, overall ELL numbers are down, we are starting to welcome more new Canadian families once again, and our ELL teams are supporting an increasing number of very beginning English speakers. We are aware that our current kindergarten and grade 1 learners have had a very atypical preschool experience. So schools are working tirelessly to support students who are experiencing high levels of dysregulation. We've welcomed a number of students with very significant health needs. Nursing support services has been providing ongoing training for school staff, but their demands too are greater, and they have limited resources, and it's taking time for them to provide training across our system. So we've been supporting schools in many ways. Most particularly, I'd like to focus on the area of capacity building. And capacity building is a beautiful segue into my introduction of our district inclusion support team. This team consists of 4 coordinators and 2 education assistants. The team supports schools in planning for our students with complex needs. The coordinators are with us this evening, and I'd like to give them the opportunity to allow us a snapshot into the work that they do on a daily basis, supporting our schools. So I'm going to turn the screen over. I'm going to ask the inclusion team to pop onto the screen here, and I'll turn the presentation over to them. Welcome.
Hi there. Thank you very much for the introduction there, Laura. And thank you to the board for having us here tonight. Just give me a moment while I bring up some slides. We always love some visuals. So what I would like to, I want to make sure that you first can see what we're speaking to. Let's give it a moment to calibrate here. The computer's running a little slower than I am. Let's try that again. Sorry, folks. There we are. Let's start at the beginning. So I'm just going to start by introducing myself. My name is Callum Lynch, and I'm the newest member of the team. But I'm a part of a wonderful team of 4 talented coordinators and 2 really phenomenal EAs that aren't here with us tonight, Annika Lindquist and CJ Farragon. I also, we all work with the direction of Carrie Steele, who can't be with us here tonight. But I was brought onto the team with a specialization in inclusive education, and I've been doing this sort of work in various capacities over the past 17 years. So it's been a welcomed new addition to working in this field. If you can see the graphic on your screen, you'll see this wonderful pie. It's divided up into 3 different directions that we take, and they really guide our practice. So we provide consultation, resources, personalized planning, all in response to individual student referrals. And this is specifically regarding complex behaviors and complex learning needs. In addition to that work.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you for just a sec. No, we've lost the slides.
Oh, I'm sorry, everybody. Let me just double check to make sure. I see. let's, you know what? I'm a very technical savvy person, so I apologize. Usually I'm on top of this kind of stuff, but of course, just trying to get some of these things together, it's always a bit of a hassle. I wanted to say that, so this is speaking to our 3 pieces of what we do, and yeah, the final piece is just capacity building, and that's a system-wide approach, and where we share resources and build up our community. So I'll let my colleagues speak more to detail, and I'm going to pass it over to Genevieve. Thank you, and apologies again.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for having us tonight. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Genevieve Busby, and my background is occupational therapy, so I bring the occupational therapy lens within our team. I use my expertise in child development to support students with complex learning needs who benefit from functional assessment and programming. The inclusion support team's startup planning process starts in May and June, where we work with school teams and the early intervention team at the Child Development Center to collect information about students with diverse learning needs entering kindergarten in September. We use the kindergarten transition planning tool shown on this slide, which was updated last January, and added to the district's website for families to access when they register their child for kindergarten. This year, 40 profiles were submitted to the inclusion support team from 14 different schools. We used this information to prioritize our support to kindergarten classrooms in September and visited most sites within the first 3 weeks of the school year. So for more information about our startup planning process, I would like to introduce my colleague, Quincy Kelly.
Thank you, Genevieve, and thank you everyone for welcoming us this evening. As Genevieve mentioned, my name is Quincy Kelly, and I think this is my 4th September with the inclusion support team, and many more Septembers for my number of years teaching. So I started teaching in 1998, and it was in about 2003 that I moved more towards working with students with exceptionalities and neurodiversity. I moved to this beautiful community just a few years ago, so I'm still pretty new to the community, and I'm very much feeling very welcome by the community here in NLPS. So what Genevieve has spoken to is the process that's in place for capturing information, really important information about new students to our system. And in addition to which allows us as a team to be proactive and very responsive, targeting our supports and our capacity building efforts with our colleagues to ensure that we create safe, caring, inclusive environments for our all of our students. And one of the areas that I have the pleasure of focusing on throughout the system is actually focused also on the momentous transition from elementary school to secondary school. So the visual that's on your screen is something new that we created this year just to visually represent how we work through the transition planning for our students moving from grade 7 into grade 8, or depending on if you live in Ladysmith, it might look a little, there's another transition in there. And so really this tool was just to visually capture all of the many wonderful things that our system is doing to support transition planning for this process. And within each of these tiered approaches are opportunities for colleagues to consult with one another, and we as a team support the capacity building of the receiving team to ensure that they feel prepared to program effectively for the students that they are receiving. These are a couple of the tools that we use to support students specifically with more tier 2 or tier 3 needs, so higher level needs and more specific and personalized programming requirements. This past spring, around in sort of the end of May, in consultation with the secondary schools and the elementary schools, the date was chosen, May 26th was the date mandate that all of these tools were submitted from the elementary schools to the secondary schools. And this gave us lots of lead time as a team to look at how we could support all of the receiving teachers and teams. And one of the amazing things that happened with the support of one of our other learning coordinators, Kim Darbyshire, and Margaret Olson, was this last year was a series that supported the secondary teams in better understanding these tools and the process, and they themselves took these transition profiles and developed a beautiful matrix of universal practices and expectations that was provided to the grade 8 teachers. So the grade 8 teachers receiving all of these different learners could capture them and ensure that the first few weeks were set up for these learners based on a lot of the common trends in these transition profiles. So that was a pretty exciting project that we worked on this May that informed September. And there was obviously more personalized support offered from our team around certain specific students for this big transition. In addition to this work, we also ensured that we were spending some time in June really reflecting and visiting the schools and observing our students with the most complex behaviors that really require more student-specific safety planning. And we use the data from those observations to really, you're getting the theme, I guess, prioritize our support in the system for September to ensure we were where we needed to be to support the teams in feeling prepared and updating programming for these really complex students, which made our September startup really fruitful and focused, which I think is a really important thing to do when we're a team working with everyone in the system with these really important little people and bigger people too. So thank you so much for your time, and just to speak a little bit more to what September startup looked like, here is my lovely colleague Trina Norgan.
Thank you, Quincy, and again, thank you everybody for having us this evening. My name is Trina Norgan, and I'm a fairly new member to the Inclusion Support Team. I've joined the team with a counseling background and am really passionate about supporting school teams and students who may be impacted by mental health, trauma, and/or complex behaviors. So we've done a lot of work in May and June that sort of informs how our startup is going to be, and we want our startup always to be as proactive and intentional as we can. So these are just some of the numbers that will hopefully give sort of an idea of what our startup has really looked like in September and October of this year. So we had 159 students flagged to inclusion support as complex learners and new to a school building. So what this means is that it captures students either new to the district or new to a school building. So this would encompass kindergarten students, grade 8 students, or even a complex learner who is moving schools within the district. Students are identified to the inclusion support team through the transition profiles and/or inclusion support coordinator and school-based team observations. There have been 47 new referrals to date at both elementary and secondary levels, so from September and October. We always are sort of capturing 18 elementary students. They're continually followed by our team as they maintain a Category C designation. So that means for a moderate intellectual disability, an inclusion support coordinator is always connected to that student and that school team to support functional programming. They do not need a referral. And so far this year, we have been to 28 elementary schools and 2 secondary schools. And one of our real guiding principles is to capacity build within the system. So we have done some training or provided some trainings and workshops to our colleagues in hopes of building some capacity around inclusive education. So some of the trainings that we have provided are some on-site support to school-based teams and inclusion support teachers pertaining to assessment and functional programming, specifically around administering the AFLs, which is the assessment of functional living skills assessment. We have provided a series of IEP boot camps to inclusion support teachers and counselors, as well as offering nonviolent crisis intervention training in different formats. So we've offered, Quincy and myself are both nonviolent crisis intervention trainers, and we have offered student-specific training as well as site-specific training to entire staff so far in September and October, and we're looking forward to absolutely doing more trainings and capacity building as the year goes on. We hope that this gives you just a sort of a brief snapshot of some of the work that we've been doing May, June, September, October, all to prepare for a really supportive startup for the school year for very complex learners and the wonderful colleagues that we work with. I thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Callum, Genevieve, Quincy, and Trina. That was a very comprehensive overview. I very much appreciate that, and I do know that it was an overview, a high-level overview, because I know that your work actually goes quite deep and quite broad, so I appreciate that. And on behalf of the entire school district and system of NLPS, we thank you for the work that you do day to day and the commitment that you have to our students and our staff. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Laura, I'm sorry, Laura, were you going to say something else?
Just the chair, we have 2 more presentations, but I'm going to pause and I'll turn it back over to you if you want to call for questions or comments.
Yes, I see Trustee Stanley has a question.
Hi, Trustee Stanley has lots of questions or would like to talk about this a lot. So I want to thank you and all your presenters. I wrote down everyone's name because I'm so glad to start hearing about inclusion support teams, and this is something I do want to hear about more, and I find it a relief to hear the language that I just heard in the variety of presenters. Exceptionality. Thank you. There's a couple of pieces that I'm going to restrain myself and not like dive in a lot, but allow me a bit. One is just I want to back up and say, hey, someone just said we're seeing a lot more complexity in our schools, and I think someone said that we're seeing a lot more diagnoses in our schools. I'm not sure. It was complexity in something, and I might have used different language. But I really want to check in on that piece there, get more information. Are we seeing the complexity at early levels and it's just that these kids are coming into our schools? Are we seeing the complexity at all levels or various challenges, whatever they are? And why are we getting an increase now? So what's the story? Do we see moving patterns? I kind of understand the little bit of a backstory of how we're understanding why we're seeing a significant increase and what that increase is of, please.
I think the term somebody used was maybe complexity, and I think there was more designations versus diagnoses, maybe, I think. And I will, before I invite the team on, so team, feel free please to turn your cameras on, is something that is, right in front of us that I must acknowledge, I think, before I invite the team to respond, is COVID has had what we now know as our grade ones and our kindergarten students have had a very atypical, preschool experience. Many of them have not had any preschool. They haven't gone to birthday parties or, gone to get, had play dates in the same way that, our 2s through grade 12s have had. So I want to put that out there. And so what happens with that is when these little people arrive at school, they haven't had any practice in small, medium, or large groups, and now they're sitting in a building of potentially 450 kids, and so that makes everything more complex, and we have to watch them and learn and the reactions, and it does make the whole situation a little bit more complex. But I see Quincy on screen, so I invite Quincy to comment on the Trustee Stanley's question.
I just wanted to clarify our we're using the terms in relation to the work that we do, and we ourselves aren't necessarily reflecting on any major changes in prevalence in our local system. I do believe Laura made mention of perhaps some of that in her introduction, but we didn't prepare any statistics around any increase in terms of designations or diagnoses, but definitely, to echo what Laura said, we have seen that as a result of year 2 of a pandemic, that we have some learners that haven't had the opportunity to be exposed to the learning environments that are school readiness learning environments for our younger students. And obviously for some of our older students with sort of neurodiversity, perhaps the interventions that they may have had were changed, and the model of those interventions from outside agencies I'm referring to perhaps changed, maybe not. But so we've seen some compounding issues, but we weren't sorry to if we didn't intend on presenting any statistics around prevalence. So I'm sorry if we caused any confusion.
Jess, do you have a follow-up?
Kind of. No confusion necessarily. It's more that I think we're all aware and concerned about the kids that have come into public education during, the younger ones during COVID times, and how that has an impact, and to what extent there are mental health impacts. As well, there was a mention about increased higher levels of dysregulation. And as a mom of 3 kids in 3 different schools, I was glad to hear that, because we're definitely hearing about it here. So as well, I feel like, and I'm only speaking as one trustee, but these are all things that we have been talking about, have been prepared, have been expecting, and really kind of, I feel, want to be informed about and on top of as much as possible, to see to which extent we need to respond differently, better. I don't know, but I feel like these are really important things for us to continue to talk about. So I'm just saying, hey, tell us more whenever you can, to whatever extent I can say that, because, it's been tough, and we're all really feeling this, and I know it's in our schools. So I'm going to stop there. I can just be put back on the list for another question.
All right, I will do that. And now Megan Zimmer, Simmer. Sorry, Megan, I mispronounced your last name.
It's okay. It's sorry, it's Simmer. Slightly less than a boil.
Okay.
I'm from the NDTA, but also from John Barsby. And Callum, it's so nice to see your face again. Yeah, so I'm pleased to see you and pleased to be here. But I do have 2 questions. I'll keep them pretty short. They're connected. So you talk about visiting 28 elementary and 2 secondary schools so far. You have been very busy. What do those visits look like? Like, are these your capacity building, like training visits, your IEP boot camps and the NVCI training, or are these specific visits where folks have requested that you come over? Can you give me kind of a summary of what those visits
Trina's
look
coming
like?
up because that was her. She sort of collated all of that information for you.
Okay.
Thank you. So our visits, they really vary based on the intent. Sometimes it might be a observation of a student, or sometimes it's a series of observation of a student and attending school meetings. Sometimes it's a training being provided, whether it's student specific or sort of program development. But often it's not just a one stop, we're there for a half an hour. And then often when we're connected to a school, we're really connected to a school. So usually, again, series of visits or observations, trainings, meetings, resource building, providing materials, and all of those pieces.
Cool.
Okay.
Thank you. So I guess related.
Yes.
I have the very great privilege in my role as the professional issues officer with the NDTA to travel out to schools to visit staffs as well. And so I've been pretty busy. I haven't raked up the numbers that you lot have, but I've visited about 5 elementary schools and 1 secondary school. And definitely, like, I have heard about like the district level inclusion team and like the capacity building pieces I love. I've definitely benefited from those pieces over my career as a teacher. And it goes a ways to helping address the needs of our students with exceptionalities, and really all students, because things that are good for our students with exceptionalities are good for all students. But the message that I hear a lot on my school visits is that there are more supports needed in terms of caring adults in the building, whether that's more teachers or more EAs. If you have any magic wands you can wave in terms of like advocating for more adults in the building, because man, our early elementary teachers are miracle workers, but lots of them are really struggling out there because the needs are so overwhelming.
Yeah, I'll acknowledge that absolutely the needs are, we have lots of needs out there, and learning services makes all of those types of decisions, and we use a multitude of data, if you will, to make some of those decisions. Absolutely. The information from the inclusion support team is just one part of that whole pie of information. But Megan, thank you for mentioning that, and we are more than well aware of the needs out there in the system. There's lots of them, as we've spoken to the needs of the students and our complex learners. Thanks.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Laura.
Did you have a follow-up or anything, Megan? Are you good?
Oh, that was my follow-up.
Okay, good.
Short and sweet, make sure. Or tried to be.
Yeah. Stephanie.
Thank you for the presentation. I too echo Trustee Stanley's excitement to have these conversations. I'm wondering, I have a couple questions. So I'll start with the resourcing question. Hearing that, we're seeing, more complexity, not, I know this was all explained, but just particularly in terms of the littles and the, their life experience leading up to, and I think about the board's responsibility here, and I think about our budget, and that we tried to think about these things, and we tried to be proactive. And I'm wondering if our level of resourcing was appropriate in terms of funding. I know we can't actually go out and grow humans on trees, but I'm wondering if did we proactively, do this well, or is there more resourcing necessary? I think about the amount of money that we just allocated last month. So I'm wondering if we're doing okay in that regard, or if our quarterly report's going to show us some surprises. And if there's anything else that we need to do to support, particularly those littles. I really have concern for that description that you're talking about, because this is these little humans' journey is just beginning in school, right? And if their journey is bumpy, then it could have a long-term impact on them and their families. And so, this issue that you're describing to me is something that's different from designations and learning exceptionalities. It's something that it feels like we do have more control over to alleviate than perhaps other areas. And so I'm just wondering if this is something that we have appropriately resourced, and if there is any more need that we need to hear about. Thanks.
Trustee Higginson, I really, really appreciate the way you've laid that out, actually, and I'm very appreciative of the acknowledgement of the need for resources out there. And, humbly, I would say, yes, I think this, systems, we're always in need of resources. I feel that learning services and the inclusion team being a perfect example of how well we are using the resources that we do have. And I know that the team here at Learning Services works tirelessly to support schools. So I do appreciate the question. I do see Secretary Treasurer on screen, so I'll invite him to respond as well.
Sure. So if that's okay, Madam Chair.
Yes, please.
So through you, so just thought, and perhaps Mr. Davey would like to provide a little bit more information, but we do have an active staffing committee as well to be monitoring the needs of schools, particularly with enrollment in mind at the beginning of the year, but then additional needs as well. And I believe the postings even went up this evening, but we have issued a significant additional staffing based paid for out of our increased enrollment that will be talked a little bit more about at our business committee, that I believe includes 6 additional EAs to the system, as well as 3.2 FTE to support language needs, but as well as our some of the kids that I think are being discussed right now. So well over $500,000 in staffing went out this week alone to address those issues. So it's something that certainly I think that Learning Services is very much on top of. And so thought that would probably some important context to provide. There's also additional staffing going to ND as well to deal with something else, but perhaps Mr. Davey would like to speak more.
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, and I just want to echo what the Secretary Treasurer's put forward. Want to thank the board for your continued support and also recognition in this area, and I'll leave it to our presenters. So thank you.
Okay. All right. Was there something you wanted to add there, Laura?
We have 2 more presentations, so whenever you're ready.
Okay, I have one question from Jessica Irving, our DPAC rep, and then I have a quick question. Yeah. Oh, and Trustee Stanley. Jessica, the other. All right.
It was just in line with Ms. Zimmer's comment on, I was just trying to figure out like how many vacancies do you still have posted in the EA and responsible adults postings? Like I know Mark just mentioned that more postings have gone out, but how many vacancies are you still trying to fill?
Mark, if you could maybe. Mark, are you there? Yeah, there you are.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just delaying, hoping that Mr. Davey would appear, because I actually don't have that answer. Of course, I think with respect to EAs particularly, we are facing not the challenge to fill postings, but of course the challenge to fill when those folks are ill for whatever reason. That continues to be a problem. But with respect to the teacher staffing, perhaps I can turn that over to Mr. Davey.
Great, thank you. And so through you, Madam Chair, again, I think what we're looking at here is support staff and filling those positions. What I can say is that the responsible adult position is not intended to fill the place or take the place of a educational assistant or other supports. So the only thing I can add in terms of response to the question that was raised at this point around the responsible adult position is that we are continuing, and we're in the process of receiving application for those positions and working with our Human Resources Department to fill and fill the need in terms of vacancies that may be out there. So thank you.
Sorry, do you just have a number though on how many positions there are?
Sorry, Jessica, I don't have a number at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you. And Charlene, Trustee McKay has a question or comment, I should say.
Thank you. So I just wanted to share a comment around what I view as appropriate and positive system response and system growth. So over the years, going way back, we won't talk about how way back, I saw some confusion for parents when they were coming in with kindergarten students and about how they could share what they know about their child. And that was a bit of a confusing time, and sometimes the forms that we used to try to collect information, they were unclear or provided permissions that maybe weren't as well understood as perhaps a parent that had been in the system for quite some time might understand. And so when I look at that kindergarten transition to kindergarten form that was up there, I really, really appreciate that that form is available to parents. We are their first teachers often, right? So to be able to share what you know about a child, I think is just incredibly valuable. And I appreciate that we're able to provide that opportunity. And I think the growth piece is an understanding, A, that we're able to share what we know about as our child's first teacher, but B, also to say that, you know, here are the other people that have cared about my child, and it's explicit permission that we're giving and understanding that that's a potential there as well, but not assumed. So I see that as a piece of growth, you know, holistically about, you know, a parent as a teacher to their child, and also just that systemic piece of clarity for parents. Couldn't let it go by without my compliments to that work. I think it says a lot about how much we've grown as a district. So thank you very much for including that in the presentation this evening.
Absolutely, I completely agree with you. And it actually, and I see Jessica, that you're there, and I just want to get my question in because it connects to this and I don't want to lose it. Through me, I'm the chair. Laura, in terms of our kindergartners, so I might have missed it, and you probably hit on it. Would you say that we have a large number of kindergartners who normally would have been involved with, say, a larger number of children who would have been involved with, say, the CDC before they came to kindergarten that didn't get that opportunity because of COVID?
Well, I think probably they may have had opportunity, slightly less, but probably a different opportunity with COVID because of the restrictions. I'm not sure if anyone from the inclusion support team wants to pipe in a little bit, but they probably would have had the connection, but it would have been very different.
Okay.
They would have had to have followed the same guidelines as the rest of the province.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think greater than that or surrounding that is also just the preschool type experiences that many of them would have had that were unable to have those experiences due to COVID.
Okay.
Hi, Genevieve.
Hi, Genevieve.
Hello. Yes, I would agree with Laura because having spent a lot of time in early years in my previous employment, we have a lot of one-on-one contact with families. We go and visit them at home, and I mean, the team at the Child Development Center, they go and visit families in their home, and that was I know that this was disturbed by the pandemic, and many families have chosen to keep their children at home from preschool or daycare opportunities, which also has affected their socialization with other students and their experience of routines and structures and just play opportunities and fine motor and gross motor work. So I would say that definitely it has had a huge impact on the development of children coming into kindergarten over the past 2 years.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And now, Jessica, I see you've got your camera on and you had a question.
I do. So, you know, it's under the category of capacity building in our system, which in inclusive education, I was really happy to hear about that. And I want to connect it to a concern of mine or a growing concern of mine about stress levels in our schools and, you know, pandemic fatigue, although I don't know it's pandemic fatigue anymore. I feel like it's just like, you know, I don't know, which is, we're all so exhausted. We're all so stressed. We're all doing our best, and it feels like we're all just kind of hanging on. Mm-hmm. And I'm really worried about that for our teachers and all of our staff in our schools, because when we talk about increased challenges, and if we also talk about, you know, when kids are stressed, it can show up or often shows up in dysregulation, and so we have a lot of stress, and the stress is compounding because of the stress. And so that is a really significant concern of mine. And I want to ask about specific pieces, because I think that these are really supportive for staff in our schools, particularly those that are interacting with kids. And that is training or education, or even just like the introducing of the concept and a way of thinking of problematic behaviors from kids as communications, and as well as looking at or understanding and interpreting their behavior in the sense of the antecedent, what came before the behavior, and then what are the consequences or what reinforces or doesn't reinforce the behavior. So I'm wanting to know if we've done any, like, you know, to what extent have we done capacity building like that in our schools? And the core reason why I'm asking is because I think it really supports staff in placing those behaviors and not reacting to those behaviors when we ourselves are so incredibly stressed and tired. So can we talk just a little bit about to what extent that has occurred or is occurring?
You bet. Quincy.
On behalf of the team, I stepped up to the camera. So first of all, I just want to acknowledge that I know we're on a timeline here and we have an agenda, and respectfully, Jessica Stanley, I could talk all the live long day about what you've just brought up. So I'll keep it short. When we refer to, and sweet, and specific, when we refer to NCI training, Trina had that on her slide, and any capacity building around that curriculum is all about proactive preventative strategies that identifies that, and through the curriculum, we work with teams to identify the setting events, the precipitating factors, the antecedents, and develop really personalized support strategies. Typically, as one of your colleagues mentioned earlier, these are strategies that are going to help everybody. So we always start with universal, but then we personalize. So we are really working with teams to identify class-wide and student-specific trends and patterns around some of those behaviors, and always through the lens of NCI curriculum says behavior is communication. It's the foundation. It's one of the founding principles of the curriculum. So that's one of the vehicles that we have in a system where we train and support capacity building. And as Trina said, that's 6-hour training. We also take those same core principles and apply them to pretty much, I'm looking at my colleagues, almost every single conversation that we have around students who are presenting with complex behaviors in our quotes. Really, we look at what is that communicating. We may never know the function of the behavior, but we know the ways that we can respond to make them, to support them and reduce the stress, because that behavior is a stress response. So we need to support their stress. So that whole Shanker's domains of self-regulation and all that jazz. So that's really something that we do through NCI, but we also reiterate that a lot with our colleagues, and to acknowledge also that our colleagues are feeling stressed, and we do support them by listening and being available, and also supporting concrete plan creating so that they feel like they have something to really sink their teeth into and really move forward with. And then we follow up, we sweep up, and we continue to support. So we do it on a student by student basis, the behaviors communication, but we also do it through our curriculum and any in-service that we offer, even if it's talking about IEP goals. We always come back to those pieces as well and look at our competency-based learning.
And you might want to reiterate that they've been to at least 30 schools and it's only November 3rd.
And can I just say, sorry, am I? No, I'm not muted. Can I just say, like, it says 2 secondary schools, but that's like physically. There's lots of secondary schools that we're working with through teams and through conferences, but those are 2 schools that we've been specifically working in, especially around transition for students coming into those buildings, and some referrals that have come in as well. So I just sort of wanted to couch that even though it says 2, we've definitely had reach outs and connects with other secondary schools in the system as well. So a shout out to the secondary teams.
All right, well, thank you very much. This has been an exceptional presentation. I've learned a great deal and I've greatly enjoyed it. Thank you all for your work, and I've raised my hands to each of you for your efforts for our children and our schools. So at this point, we are now going to move to the next item, because I don't see any more questions. And I think any other questions that we have are probably going to be broad enough that they can come up under our 2 school presentations. And now I'm going to hand it back to Laura to introduce our next presenters.
Thank you so much. So with the focus on inclusive education this evening, we have 2 school presentations for you, and I'll introduce the first one. I'd like to invite Uplands Elementary School onto the screen. We have Ed Young, principal of Uplands, and we have Sarah Tyson, who's one of our inclusion support teachers that works very closely with Ed. So thank you so much to the both of you for being here on a cold, wet Wednesday evening with your poppies. I just love it. And so I'll turn it over to you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura, and Heitzak to everyone for having us here this evening. We're super excited to tell you about the things that we do in our school every day. As Laura mentioned earlier, kind of satellite data. We're gonna bring you right down to the street level data and kind of give you an overview of what we do in the building. Keep in mind this is a short presentation, but the amount of work, time, energy, dedication, and passion that goes into the work we do every day is not reflected in this presentation. So very high level, but thank you. So I'm going to share my screen and bring up the presentation, and I'm going to have Sarah Tyson run us through it, who, by the way, is an incredible IST, just amazing at her job, and our students are extremely lucky to have her as part of our team. So okay, so you should be able to see that now. Okay, so Sarah, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, and that was a really nice welcome, so thank you. And I'm very honored and grateful to be here because this is definitely my passion, and it's an opportunity to show you what it looks like at the ground level. And what we wanted to do is show you that from a case study perspective. Now, this is not necessarily a particular student, but characteristics, a profile of students that we see on a daily basis. We wanted to show you the complexity, kind of what we've been talking about in this meeting already, that these kids are complex, and we have multiple complex students in our school, in every school in this district. I'm starting to feel a little bit greedy that of those 28 schools the inclusion team has been to, we've had multiple visits, but I'm so grateful to work with each of those parts of the team as well. So we'll get right into it. So this is I'm going to give you a brief overview of what a student could look like coming into us. Sometimes we have a heads up, sometimes we don't. We like to be, the word proactive has come up already tonight, and we try to be as proactive as possible. I want to start with saying that we love to look at kids' strengths first, because using their strengths in their programming is a great way to get them engaged and on the right track. So let's say the student loves cars and building, very creative imagination, but here's where some of the difficulties lie in an everyday scenario at school. Difficulties regulating, screaming, eloping, physical boundary issues, difficulty regulating during seat work and maybe with transitions. What we want to move into now is how we take this data, and these observations could come from teacher, from admin, from people in my position as an inclusion support teacher, from the district team as well. But what we do is we create goals for each student. They're very student specific, and they're driven by that data so that we know that we're creating a program that is for that student one and only. On that note, sometimes these are students that have designations and come with funding, and sometimes they don't, but the level of support and wraparound for each student doesn't change. We still have an obligation to provide a really good program despite what they're coming in with. So for this particular student, we would set some goals. In this case, we want them to come to school, number one. We want them to leave school with a positive outlook based on successes they've had throughout the day. We want to create and maintain positive peer relationships and also complete some adapted academic tasks. We don't want to leave that totally to the wayside, but we want to make sure that we're helping to create an environment that they're able to do that. So what this day could look like, in this case, we have an alternate entrance to help with, keeping the relationships with peers positive, because entering the building can sometimes be difficult for kids when it's a big lineup, when there's parents around, when there's other kids running by. That's a lot of stimuli for some of our kiddos. So in this case, we start our day 10 minutes later and we enter through the front door with a lovely caring adult waiting at the door to greet them. Lots of visual supports in place. Preferred location for controlled choice in academic tasks. And I want to explain this one a little bit. In some of the workshops I've done with educational leaders like Shelley Moore or other people in inclusive education, inclusion sometimes requires us to take a step back to give a student the skills to be able to be successful in the classroom. It's not always possible to give them those skills in the classroom right away, but we try to do that as quickly as possible with the goal to get them into the class all the time. So for this, in this case, we took an idea from our lovely inclusion team to provide some, we call it controlled choice. So the academic task might be around cutting for somebody just starting kindergarten. It might be around addition for a kiddo a little bit earlier. or later in school. And the task in the classroom might be a little bit too much for them. So we provide a different choice. Well, you can do the same task as what's going on in the classroom, or you can do this other task that's working on the same criteria and same academic goal, but they get a little bit of that choice in a preferred location that maybe has less stimuli, so that they can work on building those skills to then complete that task, hopefully within weeks or days in the classroom. Which comes to the next point about rejoining the class for positive peer interactions, which is, you know, maybe centers or other activities in the classroom that aren't as stimulating for them, but also building stamina and confidence to then try those non-preferred tasks with their peers. And so we want to create that system where they're able to do that successfully in a proactive way instead of retracing ourselves. So I swear by this day in and day out, you need a strong team. And I have been really lucky to have a strong team for years at my school. And it makes all of our jobs 100 times easier. So at the school level, often involved in planning is the IST, the admin team, classroom teacher, maybe the EA, SLP, our speech and language pathologist. We might also need some support from our CY, our child and youth family support worker, or our school psychologist that comes from time to time as well. There's lots of people in a school-based team. The team communication is crucial so that we're all working on the same page and working towards the same goals, and we all know what the bits and pieces are to create a successful plan. And hopefully we have parents that are involved at every step, and the majority of the time we do. We also have the district inclusion support team. So they come in to help. They've talked about the supports that they provide, and this is integral for us. It's such a great support to have with communication around integration planning, helping design student-centered planning, and the NCI training as well. And that's just a snippet. There's so many more with functional programming or the therapeutic swim program. It goes on, the list goes on. And in a case like this, we might also have CDC involvement. So it even goes beyond our district inclusion support team sometimes. So we might refer for school age therapy, or we might connect them to the early intervention program to help both at home and at school to create some common ground. So these are some of the key pieces of inclusive education that we run off of. Safe and inclusive planning based on student needs, and that's data driven. Communication and a team approach. We don't want anybody to feel alone in these complex situations because it can be very isolating really quickly. So we want to make sure that people feel like they're supported and they have a team behind them to help do this work. And Ed and I just wanted to leave you with a thought to ponder, not necessarily answer right now, but to go home and think about. What do you think are the key pieces to successful inclusive education?
Thank you, Ed and Sarah. That was amazing. That was a beautiful sort of case study for us to watch and to see and to experience alongside you, sort of what happens in one of our schools. And it paired beautifully with the inclusion support team's presentation as well. You brought some of their work alive in one of our schools. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And again, you're going to keep hearing the same word over and over and over, and it's team, team, team. We don't work in isolation in the building. We don't work in isolation in the district. So team is the #1 thing here. So as Sarah said, making sure that nobody is alone or feels alone and everyone feels supported, especially families. Sometimes we have families that are coming in and they're not sure what's going to happen. They've seen behaviors at home with their child maybe, and they're maybe a little uneasy. So you know, having them feel supported is really important for us as well. So thank you again for having us this evening.
Thank you so much. And if you are able to stick around for one more school presentation, because the board may have questions after that.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. All right, there we go. So
Hello, everyone.
I'm very happy to introduce our team from Cedar Community Secondary School. So I'm going to turn it over to our principal Laura Roberts and our vice principal Jim Pasco, and they're going to present what they've titled "The Spaces in Between" at Cedar Community.
Yes, very timely, actually, this conversation, just an extension of what everybody's been talking about this evening. Just, thank you very much for having us. Jim and I talk a lot about the spaces in between. I'm going to share my screen because I just had a few slides to kind of guide our conversation. Make sure I do this right. There we go. Are we good?
Yeah, perfect.
Awesome. So we've been talking a lot this evening about what inclusion looks like and what it looks like in the classroom and beyond. What we often don't talk about is what inclusion looks like in between the classroom. And we have discussed quite a bit this evening about the effects of the pandemic and so on, and the increase in mental health concerns, anxiety, dysregulation, all these big ideas about, what's happening with our students. But really, when we're on the ground in the day, around in between each of our classes, there's lots of stuff going on to try to help those students stay connected to school. So in secondary school, we've been, especially in the last several years, faced with a lot more students arriving who are not engaging in the classroom. And we have lots of different case studies we could talk about, and Uplands did a great job of presenting what a typical case could look like, even at the elementary level. But imagine that case study with an adolescent who has disconnected from school for a number of reasons. And of course, in the last few years, because of the pandemic, that has become even more challenging. So our team, we work together tirelessly to try to connect students back into the classroom, but sometimes the connection is just about getting them in the building. What inclusion looks like at Cedar is a little bit different in a way. We are a small secondary school, as you all know. Cedar is definitely a microcosm of a larger school. We often talk about how, at Cedar it's small, so we have more flexible ways we can do things. We can be a little more creative, but it also forces us to make sure that we are meeting the needs of all of our students with a small number of staff. So there are some things that we have in place at the school that help us meet the needs of all our students. Of course, we do a lot of work with our teachers at a basic level of our universal design for learning. We work a lot, our inclusion support teachers, with teachers in the classroom, adapting and differentiating their instruction just for all students. One of the things we can do at Cedar is a lot of project-based learning across subjects. So this is really important when we're trying to engage students in learning, to start with projects that they're really interested in and then move out from there. So the other thing we've done at Cedar to adjust our inclusion supports is we've moved our Indigenous Aboriginal support center from upstairs to downstairs. So this is a very physical thing that we've done. One of the things we've noticed is the amount of our students that are on reserve are really struggling to connect with school. So we have opened up a room in the lower part of our school that's near an external door. And we've noticed that more and more students are starting to kind of feel welcome and come back into the school. What's really challenging is finding the classroom, the traditional classroom for many of our students, that they are feeling very anxious or in a large space with a bunch of people, they're having a really hard time going into the classroom. So it's really important that we are providing spaces outside the classroom for each of these students. So our Indigenous Welcome Center has become a really important hub in our school. We moved our food programming, our breakfast, our lunch program has all been shifted into this space. And it's become a very social space as well as a place for students to drop in, have an adult to connect to before they head off for the day. Another thing we've implemented is a lot of flexible scheduling. So a student who may have some complex behavior needs might need to have a shorter start time. So a student in grade 11, say, who has trouble getting up in the morning, you work with him or her or them, and they might start their day a little bit later. So when that happens, of course, the traditional classroom time becomes a bit of a barrier. So the inclusion support team will work with the teacher of that classroom, as well as the parent and the student, to talk about, well, what would entering the class look like that day if they're coming in on a flexible schedule. So that's something else we can do, that we do as well, to try to break down the walls of all the classrooms in a way. The next thing we work on with students who are having challenging behaviors or struggling to go into the actual classroom is some blended learning. And this was opened up a lot more for us at the secondary school level anyway, around the time when students were doing learning at home. And so we realized for some students who are not going into the classroom that learning from home actually benefited those students. So in some cases, we do have a few of our grade 10 through 12 students who are doing some work from home and then maybe coming to the school in the afternoon to do some work. So this type of blended learning has really helped us reach, especially those students who are struggling with their anxiety, to find a space for them to have some time that works for them and then come into the school at a later time of the day doing a subject of their choice. So that blended learning model has been really important. Some of our students have registered in our Island Connect as part of our blended learning. So somebody might have, say, a language arts 12 and a math 11 course that they learn from home, and then to make sure that they're having social connections, which is really important, as we know with adolescents, that their afternoon would be then at Cedar sometimes in a structured class, sometimes not. So that all depends on the needs of that individual student. Another thing that we do at Cedar, and you may know this because of whatever previous connections with the school, but we do run a 5-block schedule as opposed to a 4-block schedule in a regular semester. So we have focus or space blocks for our grades 10, 11, and 12 students. So instead of being assigned 4 courses full through the day, they're assigned 4 classes, plus one of their classes during the day is a focus or space block where they're connected with another adult. It's not their regular classroom teacher, and they have an extra amount of time during the day for some individualized one-on-one instruction with somebody, or a place to do a work project, or catch up with work that they haven't necessarily finished in the classroom. Because of this shift in structure, we're talking about shifting structures as well as finding spaces. The space blocks offer an opportunity for many students who are struggling with getting some work done or what have you in the classroom to have that extra time. And in some cases, the space blocks teacher ends up being their key go-to person that they can connect with when they're having a trouble with a friend, or it's just another adult in the building that students can connect to. We all know that the more adults that students connect to, the more success they have. So outside of this sort of basic structures, process we have for all students, we still have students who are struggling to go into the classroom. So what we've been talking about in our team, and this is kind of bringing me back to the spaces in between the premise of our talk tonight, is what we're doing is working on individualized programming for students who are really not engaging in a classroom. And often these are the students who have severe behavior challenges. They're often dysregulated. Many of them are dealing with drug and alcohol issues and all the stuff around that. Some of the students who we have in our individualized programming space, they have been out of school for a number of months or sometimes up to a year. The proximity of Cedar doesn't allow necessarily for students to go somewhere else to do their schooling. Really, Cedar is where they come and where they need a space to belong. These are the students who are often, in what we talk about in our team, the most excluded. At times, challenging behaviors or dealing with dysregulation, anxiety is really, really challenging for the adults in the building. These are the students who are, they might swear, they come into the building, they've had a terrible evening, they might have been out, something's going on in their families. Lots and lots of students who have extensive amount of trauma. And of course, what's happened, and we talked about this and Laura talked about it earlier too, is that pandemic fatigue has hit students as well. And more so the students who have already had challenges in their life. So our team this school year especially has really worked at how do we keep these students connected to our school, because we know if they're not connected to our school, they're not necessarily going to school anywhere. And especially the location being a little more south and away from maybe a traditional sort of learning alts program or moving to another school is not possible. So we often talk about doing whatever it takes and anything that keeps them coming through the door kind of approach to working with challenging adolescents. You know, the kids are big, they have big voices and their bodies, and they often, deal with their stressors in externalizing behaviors. So it's been more so this year. So of course we rally together, talk a lot about, well, how are we going to do this? So one of the things we work together a lot with is who is the one adult in the building that particular student likes, connects with, wants to say hi to. And sometimes it's myself, the principal, walking around the hallways. I'm often, bumping into students, hey, how's it going? Or are you coming in today? Oh no, not feeling like it today. Okay. Sometimes it's the vice principal, Jim Pasco, sometimes connects with kids. Sometimes it is the inclusion support teacher. Sometimes it's an art teacher and a student who's really struggling with their anxiety only feels safe in the art room. So the school-based team, the inclusion team, we work with the art teacher and that student, sometimes together, sometimes not, because they don't always want to come to a meeting, many of these students. So yeah, it depends on the person where that particular student space sits in the school. I have two male students, one who has, I could name on my hand the number of diagnoses, depressive disorder, ODD, ADHD, autism, as well as a student having a mild intellectual disability. This particular student is only able to right now walk into the building, sit into our main learning commons, because the space of the classroom, he describes the walls closing in. All the staff all know that that student's space is there, and we talk about what works best for that student when trying to get him to, one, do some work if that's good for the day, or two, just follow some of the regular routines of the day. So that is what we've been doing with many of our students on an individualized programming, and we've had a lot of success with then moving towards working in a classroom. It doesn't always get there. And that's the one thing Jim and I have been talking about, and what we wanted to just stress is sometimes, especially when you get to the grade 11 and 12 space, they don't get to the place where they enter back into a classroom. So we're often doing work programs, so we connect kids with work experience so they have some job skills, get them out, connecting with people in the community. Of course, we've been using our own district supports. I know we have one of the inclusion support specialists who comes in and works with students who are transitioning to CLBC, for example. But this is really what we wanted to share tonight, was the work we're doing that's not in the classroom. And sometimes kids, they don't get back there at the late time of high school. Again, credit completion is something we do a lot of. You know, anybody who hasn't finished a math or a science or English course, we switched some language. Instead of calling it credit recovery, we started calling it credit completion. And our whole staff is now on board with the idea that a course doesn't have to end at a specific time. It ends when the students demonstrated their competencies in that course. So that's allowed us to shift a lot out of the classroom traditional walls to allow students, to find their space at the school. We do have some structural things we've done within our teaching schedule. Some of our teachers have actually got outreach non-enrolling blocks in their schedule. But what we're finding is it doesn't matter who has the block, it's who has the relationship with the student that helps that student to build their own kind of learning program. So it's messy, and you notice my background is sort of like a swoosh of water over rocks, because there's never really a straight line, and some days we try something and it doesn't work, we try something else. So a key for all of this, and it very much reflects the last presentation from the elementary school, was our school-based team and the communication with all the staff. Mind you, we are a small school, but we have so much passion and capacity to keep kids at Cedar and not have them outside of the school, because once they're outside the school, our power and control or connection with those kids is really, really limited. So outreach is really important to us, and we don't just mean outreach like, hey, come see me when you come to the school. No, we're literally going out to see kids. Some our child and youth family worker, she actually goes to students, has sometimes a coffee. Hey, how can I help you get some work done? Bringing them an assignment to try to keep that connection to the building. It's not a clear, something I could put on a chart process, but it is something we're really working hard at. And lastly, I just want to mention that a lot of this involved our staff looking at trauma-sensitive practice. I know we've been reading articles. We did a recent professional learning. We looked at Kim Barthel's presentation, little parts of it that we did some discussion around what trauma really means and how it affects learning. We've also done some work with just talking a little bit more openly about mental health in school and what it looks like. So some of our PLC, our personal learning inquiries this year, revolve around how do we help students with regulating their emotions and their social emotional learning. So not not a very clear 100% this works for every student, but it is something that we are really passionate about at Cedar is our individualized programming. So thank you. Hopefully that helps you get a little flavor of what inclusion looks like kind of on the ground in a secondary school setting.
Do we have any questions? Right. I just, Dawn and Laura, was there anything you'd like to say to wrap up before I just check if there's questions?
I don't think so, but we do welcome questions or comments for sure.
Okay, are there any questions from, Charlene has a comment. And you can go now, Char.
Thanks. Seems I'm rolling with comments today. I don't have a lot of questions. However, oh good, there's Ed. Who else needs to pop up on my screen there? You know, let me just be the one filled with gratitude for the moment. And if everybody else comes up with lots of questions, then that's perfect. But for this moment, I have sat here, I've had some tears while I've listened about elementary and secondary and what that means to have kids in schools. I truly believe that the magic of our success is kids being connected to people, not buildings, not their favorite class, but people. And sometimes that comes in the form of, you know, the right door to come in the morning. Sometimes that means a child really looking at a child and saying, you know what, I know you can't work in that classroom right now, and that's okay. We're going to find a space for you. I cannot even possibly underscore how important that is, because our whole goal is to help them succeed. And when I think to what Lisa Marie shared so many times at this table is that it's not about equality, it's about equity. And I think this truly is equity in action. I'm really honored and grateful for the work that you're doing. It's really impacting children deeply, and they might not know it right now, but we all know you're doing the right thing, and they're going to look back and say, yeah, that made a huge difference in my life. That's why I am where I am today. So I just want to express my deep, deep gratitude for taking the time to share these stories, and messy or not, it's making a difference. And so sometimes it's okay that we can't put it into a nice, neat little checklist. Thank you so much. I'm very, very grateful.
Thank you, Char, and I'm going to follow up on that later, but I see Jessica Stanley, one of our trustees, has a question about elementary schools.
I do, but I don't want to follow that.
I know.
That was beautiful. Thank you. I agree, and I'm really glad to hear the word equity. And you know what wasn't said directly, but I know I've heard Charlene talk a lot about this, and us as, you know, meeting the needs of our most vulnerable, and I remember someone said, you know, and that's how we meet the needs of all of our students. So thank you, Charlene. I can't quite respond to that. That's beautiful. I want to ask a specific question, and it's more focused, I think, about elementary schools, but not necessarily. And it's really a question that I get both from kids in my life and from adults in my life, and I've not got a good answer for them. So, and it's about the use of electronics in our schools, in our classrooms, among, or usually, you know, by kids with complex learning needs. And I want to understand this a little bit better. So can someone help me? Because what I hear is, you know, so-and-so's playing video games, or so-and-so's, you know, on their tablets. And I want to understand how we use that for students with complex learning needs. Like I said, I hear it more generally about elementary schools, but you know, I don't, it may apply to secondaries, but I just want to kind of understand how we use those tools and how I can answer questions about that.
So I'll invite Sarah probably to jump in, but I want to also, present the caveat that Sarah's probably, will be speaking from her context in particular, not on behalf of all elementary schools in the whole district, but she has a pretty good perspective. So Sarah, are you okay with taking a stab at that one?
Yeah, I've got a few examples that we do have different forms of technology for some of our students with diverse needs. I can give you a couple examples from our building. We do have a few students who are essentially nonverbal, who have augmentative devices, AAC devices that are used for communication. They are in the form of an iPad. Typically, these have locked to screens, so they can only access their communication part of their device. That's one way we use technology. This one's an extremely personal case because it's my child, but my daughter has a physical disability. We use an iPad for her because her hands fatigue. She's missing bones in her arms. So she uses an iPad and a keyboard so that she can keep up in writing tasks. So it could be for a student with those kind of needs. We also have a global, and it's something that's available to all students in the district, which is Google Read and Write. So it is an app on an iPad or our Chromebooks where students it's a speech to text. So this helps our kids with learning disabilities where they have a disability in written output. It helps kids who sometimes just need that ability just to use their words instead of trying to get it down on paper. So we also have that, but that's available to all students as well. So those are a few examples of using technology. I mean, classrooms use some apps. We use Lexia at our school, which is a literacy app to help students further their literacy skills, but we have all students using that. It also is really helpful for our ELL learners. There's also math programs like Prodigy. Some schools use Mathletics. So there are some more programs that classrooms use in general. I hope that helps to answer your question.
And if I can just add to Sarah, so there's also students that have they have different ways that they can show what they've learned. So a student doesn't necessarily have to write out an essay to show that they've learned, all about the water cycle. Lots of times we use the Chromebooks or the tablets for students to be able to create presentations because they're just more creative that way. It's easier for them rather than the written output. So they're also used a lot for students to show how they've learned a particular topic.
Jim, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind. I think at secondary, it's a little different. One of the things that we discuss all the time is related to, because we got young adults that are in a workplace, and they will be in a workplace very soon. And so we want to have them learn how to use their devices without getting in the way of their education, right? So just taking them away. And so that isn't actually great either, right? Because it's actually not teaching them what they need to learn. So I know at our school, we do have, especially in the grade 8 level, there are some teachers actually have a little box. They collect them at the beginning of the class and then return them later. But as we move forward, we're trying to teach not just teachers, but the kids as well, when the appropriate time to use that device is. Some teachers are good at using them, and they may use them for poll questions to see if the kids understand the concept, stuff like that. They may use it for Google Classroom to do some assignments, things like that. But I hear you, Jessica. It's a great question. We do know that some kids will sneak on these devices and play games a bit too much. So it is something that we have to monitor and make sure it's not getting in the way of their education. But again, also teaching them the appropriate times to use it. And I think that's super, super important. And I know at our school, that is something we discuss with the teachers all the time, especially with Chromebooks, because they're so portable. People will take those and hide in a corner and turn a game on. It's a little bit different than the computer lab where all the monitors were facing you in the olden days, but I think that's important. And one other piece to that, I think for a lot of these complex kids, whether it's a game or whatever it is, sometimes going on that is a way for them to de-escalate a problem that they're having, or go on their phone and do a quick text to mom or whatever, and sometimes that'll bring them down. So we try to make sure we're there using them for appropriate things.
All right, thank you. And I see Stephanie has a question.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much for these amazing presentations. I was just saying earlier, like almost in tears, that we're not doing enough conversations about the things that fill our buckets. And so I'm just going to keep you here all night so that you can fill up our buckets, which is not fair to you. And I recognize that. So I do just want to really recognize, I want to start out before I ask my question, this incredible work that everyone's doing, like hearing the elementary level and the secondary level and the connection to the adults in the building. Like, I just really appreciate it. And in full disclosure, this is my child's high school, and it does feel like it's a big giant hug every day. We're so thankful for the effort that the adults in that building put into making my child feel good about himself. It's really beautiful. And, you know, Laura, I heard you talking about the, you know, the 5th course, and, you know, Sarah and Dawn talking about the case study and the teamwork, and talking about the soft start, because some kids have a hard time coming in early. And, you know, one of the things that I thought was great about COVID was it did give us a moment to sort of rethink our systems. And one of the things that I thought was really great was that first couple of days last year where we brought kids in early who might need that time. And it makes me think about how sometimes I feel like we've gotten to a place in inclusion where we're trying to stick a square peg in a round hole. And we really need a moment to sort of rethink the system and build its needs around those students, because my kid's going to be okay. Like, and the system is built around his needs. And then we brought a bunch of kids into the system that it was never built for their needs. And my kid is going to be okay. I'm really fortunate. He'll be fine with whatever system. And I wonder how we create that space and that conversation for us to say, how do we redesign our system, starting in NLPS, around the needs of those students? Is that, like, where do we create that space and that conversation? And this might not be something that we can answer tonight, but just because I feel like we need to, like, I want my bucket filled. I'm asking the big questions tonight, and I don't know, do we have the place for that conversation? Is it worth finding the space for it? Do we need to have it? Is it too dreamy?
No,
no. You know what? If I may, that is the question right there. That's the inquiry, because, you know, as long as I've been doing this job, the elephant in the room is who wants to deal with the challenging behaviors? Who knows how to deal with anxiety? Who knows how to take in a traumatic disclosure from a student? This happened, you build those relationships. It's almost like teachers need to be counselors as well these days. And as a principal, my role has changed significantly in the last 5 years even. And so that is the best question to be asking right now where we're at, because if we're not building it for those ones that are not in the classroom, then yeah, exactly. And
Trustee Higginson, I love the question, and I can't help but comment. Thanks so much, Laura. This is a question that I've been asking myself a lot lately, and it's this idea of building a culture with our leaders where they feel safe to take risks. They feel psychologically safe to take risks. They know that Dawn and I are learning services, that we're going to have their back if they decide to completely tear down what we know as modern education today, and we will work with them. We will support them around with the Ministry of Education to get the support of the board, to help them with their parent advisory councils, you know, with their staff. So one small step in that direction among many that we're taking. We've a small group of principals, and Dawn and myself are taking an innovative leadership program this year. And the purpose behind us taking that program is to have our principals, vice principals connect and be in conversation with leaders who challenge them, but also with colleagues from around the province, Canada, and the world. Actually, they've got some international students in there as well, from Australia, New Zealand, I think, to push the boundaries. And part of why Dawn and I are attending alongside with them is to build relationships so they know that they can trust us and that we support them to be super innovative and super creative. Because why? exactly the reason that you've just said.
Yeah.
Can I just have a quick follow-up, Tanya?
You may.
Thanks. I really appreciate the responses. It's just, you know, like I can tell how much you are all thinking about this on a regular basis, which also shows me that this is a place where you're constantly stubbing your toes. And I think that this is a place, and it almost feels like, you know, it's like putting more Band-Aids on something. And I appreciate the idea of supporting our leaders who want to be innovative, but I also think there's systemic issues that we really need to break down that do require, I think, some advocacy from the board at the provincial level. And so I think I would just love for us to create time to work together on this issue, like this square peg and round hole issue, because as long as we still keep trying to cram 30 kids into one big building, we're using an old model that doesn't match any of the things that we're talking about right now. And I think you're doing an amazing job at serving the kids' needs in the model that we have. But it does feel like we're sticking a square peg in a round hole, and we have a lot of work to do. And I really challenge us to, you know, create that conversation about building the system around those kids' needs and then building out from there. So thank you for the time tonight. I really appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, I'm kind of at a loss for words because everything Stephanie just said, and I don't even think it's now. I mean, I'll share a little bit of my own personal experiences. I'm 51 years old, and I grew up in our system, and although I'm certainly not going to say I shouldn't have been integrated, because I certainly should have been, everybody sort of seemed to think, well, because everything was fine academically, that there were others that they didn't catch, that there were some other stuff that I needed supports around, you know, and we, particularly kids with physical disabilities, I'm going to just tell you, there's often something else. There's often emotional components and the children don't even know it necessarily. So we have to be watching for those. I mean, I'll be honest. I'll share with you, in elementary school, I would have meltdowns, you know, emotional meltdowns. And it was just stress and anxiety that I didn't know how to process or communicate. I didn't understand it myself. So how could I explain it to the adults in the room? You know, so we have work to do, and I agree with Stephanie that as a system that there's an advocacy piece that I hope that as a group that we will talk about what that advocacy can look like and what options we might have for. And I'm not throwing this out there as something this is just brainstorming off the top of my head. But whether it's a working group to get deeper into these questions and bring something back to the board, I don't know, but these conversations have to keep happening. Thank you for your work tonight and always, but thank you for sharing it with us. Yeah. So am I seeing any other questions? No, I am not. I'm seeing our Scott, our superintendent, coming up on the board on the screen. So Scott, would you like to share something?
Yeah, thanks. If I could, through you, Madam Chair, just maybe at this time I'll share a few thoughts about this evening's presentation. Impressive presentations this evening by the inclusion support team, Cedar Secondary and Uplands Elementary. It was an absolute pleasure to sit back and learn alongside trustees this evening. I know it fills trustees with pride to hear our staff share stories about how they undertake this work with the most vulnerable, complex, and dysregulated students. Ed, I appreciate the emphasis on team, ensuring all of our students feel that they belong and they feel safe within our schools. And of course, this work requires a coordinated effort. The passion and expertise was clearly on display this evening. So a big thank you to all of the presenters for their, even maybe a couple of mic drop moments in my mind. But thank you for all the presenters for their ongoing commitment to all of the students in Nanaimo Ladysmith Public Schools. I've said for a long time now that the best measure of the quality of a school or a school district as a learning community is how it addresses the needs of our most vulnerable students. And to Trustee Higginson's point, yep, we have lots of work to do. And I think we're moving in a good direction. So thank you, thank you, thank you. It was a really great evening. Much appreciated.
Thank you. And now we are going to transition to one more item on our agenda before we get to some new business. Tim Davey, our Deputy Superintendent, is going to give us an update on the school calendars.
Thank you, Tanya. And through you, I would just like to have the Education Committee members turn to page 9 of 13 in your agenda package to look at the information sheet regarding local school calendars. At this time, you've been provided with background and some further information, and I would like to just provide a brief update on the local school calendar submission and the process that we're involved in. As you may recall, the board amended the current school calendar in September of this year to recognize September 30th as the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. And we are awaiting direction from the ministry on how this day will be commemorated next September. And it's likely that the 2022-23 school calendar, which has already been approved by the board, will have to be amended at that time. Also to let you know that the school calendar committee will be meeting this month to begin the process of creating a multi-year school calendar beginning in 2023-24. So we'll be going through a very similar process to what we went through last year. And all recommendations from the committee will be brought forward to a future education committee meeting. So I leave you with that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any questions. I think that was pretty self-explanatory. Appreciate that update. Oh, question from Megan.
I agree. It was a very straightforward presentation, but I don't know what a multi-year school calendar means. This means you plan like 5 years ago, 3 years ago. How does, or just one calendar that we're going to reuse forever? What does that mean?
Through you, Madam Chair. What we've typically presented to the board for approval is a 3-year calendar. And with the calendar committee, we actually do have members both from the NDTA and from CUPE that sit on the committee, along with trustees, principals, vice principals, and members from the district staff. So we create a calendar together, present recommendations. We have representatives again from DPAC and so forth. So it's just a comprehensive calendar. The only reason that we came back for an amendment this year was because of the federal implementation of the Truth and Reconciliation Day. And we'll start our work now, heading out for the next 3 years.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Seeing no further questions, thank you for that clarification and explanation, Tim.
Thank you.
We have no correspondence and we have no unfinished business. And now Charlene McKay, our policy committee chair, will be speaking about our strategic plan policy.
Thank you, Tanya. So I have the good fortune of working with several of my fellow board members on the policy committee, and they nominated me to, when I wasn't at a meeting, I might note, to bring this forward to the rest of the board and to the education committee for consideration. So we've taken a look at strategic planning. We've gone through strategic planning as a board through a very thoughtful process, and we wanted to capture that process along with future monitoring and how do you utilize a strategic plan so that it's something more than what an item that you create once and never think about again. And so we wanted to capture that embedded in policy so that future boards, and have that knowledge and policy direction through governance. And so what you see pages 10 through 13, there's an action sheet there that gives you some of the background as well as the draft itself. We went through a lot of drafts on this one. We took some good practices. We based it on what we've done ourselves. And this is the draft that we bring forward for consideration for the board this evening. And we are looking for a recommendation to send it out to a notice of motion for 30 days to bring in some further feedback from partner groups, those that sit at this table, as well as the more broad school community and the community beyond, I suppose, the traditional walls of our buildings. And so with that, I will leave it there. I think the action sheet has most of the information there, and I'm happy to take questions, or of course our discussion can often sometimes lead us to change a little bit of wording here and there as well. And even with the recommendation tonight, if there were some brief changes that people wanted to see, we could accommodate those prior to the regular board meeting at the end of the month.
I see Stephanie has a question.
Thank you. So I have a few questions. Sorry. People always think we're just going to like race through this section of the agenda. So first question is around the proposed term of a strategic plan. So here's my concerns. My concerns are that we put things in policy, and then when we change a policy, it's like a really big deal, right? And so that's often why some of our policies are much more higher level, broad-based, and not quite specific. So my first question around the specificity of some of the things that are in this policy, proposed policy, is around the proposed term of strategic plan being between 3 and 5 years. I'm wondering why that length of time, and if a length of time even needs to be put into the policy, specifically because the proposals that you're talking about are parts of things that would be in a report or an action sheet. I'm just worried about nailing us into boxes.
Thank you. If I might, Chair.
You may.
Thanks. I love that that's where you've started your questions, because we grappled with this quite a bit, and we weren't sure, should it be 3, should it be 5, should it be 10 perhaps, so that there's longevity to the plan. And what we ended up doing was looking to the strategic planning training that came from the BCSTA and the guidelines that were provided there. And so we thought, well, if there's going to be something in there, then let's take that standard perhaps, and it gives us a bracket of 3 to 5 years, which would allow for election cycles to be considered as well. Perhaps there's overlap, and hopefully it would align itself well to review, was what we supposed. That being said, there was also a conversation of, do we need those numbers? And so if the board were to say this evening, we don't want numbers, we just want to say that we will have, then that's obviously a change that we could make. So a lot of conversation that came around that. I don't know if I totally answered you.
You did. And I think I would feel better if it just said, the action sheet would say the proposed term of the strategic plan, period. Just because it doesn't box us in, right? And I appreciate that we utilized existing resources on it, but I'm always very concerned about specificity and being too specific. So that was one area. I'm gonna get my concerns out, and then we'll see where it goes, if that's okay. My other big concern was around the monitoring and evaluation, and in particular, the list of areas and data that was used. And what I noticed was, and again, this gets to specificity, and perhaps we don't need a list. Perhaps that's something that is just noted that a review process will be determined by the board, because, so here's what I see. I see no mention of report card data. I see no mention of district assessments. We're only relying on FSA graduation rates, but we do all these amazing district assessments, like classroom, that were developed by the district. I don't see a mention of the how are we doing report. I don't see a mention of staff, of how our staff is feeling. How do we measure how our staff is feeling? Are they engaged? Do they agree with this plan? So I'm seeing some things that I think maybe means that we probably maybe should take out reference to specificity around what we'll use to monitor. But more importantly, how come we didn't put some of those things in there? The end. Big question, sorry.
These are, again, big contemplations that we went through, trying to figure out what do you fit in, what do you leave out? Does other applicable data cover all of those things that you just mentioned? Should we be specific in adding, you know, what is perhaps a starter list of places where you might find data that's appropriate in the district? I'm amenable to a more broad statement that says you'll collect, you know, that staff will collect data, sort of to your point, because then it's all inclusive of all the data that you can collect from many different sources. I think you've just hit on the point of debate that here's the draft and let us know what you think. So I don't necessarily have an answer for you other than to say that number 6, if I can remember my Roman numerals appropriately, was to cover all of those other items. However, it does leave us questioning, perhaps, does something get forgotten when we leave it under other? I would leave it to the board to provide further input on that if they'd like to see it shortened into something a little more broad.
I see a comment from Jessica, who's also, Jessica, I'm going to hand it to you because I know you were part of this conversation as well.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that a lot of the stuff that we got a little bit more hung up on in some ways, talked a lot about, explored, are the very questions that are coming out. And so this feedback's really useful. I think, I would love feedback on this. I think the conclusion that we ended up coming to is this is at a minimum, or are these really kind of things that we thought were, at least needed to be on there, and that more things could be audited under under other applicable data. So, I think it's worthwhile, are other things necessary to be identified? Are some of these things, should some things be traded? I mean, the question of how to evaluate a strategic plan was a big one. And so I guess A, do we have the right necessaries on there, or B, do we go to something that's less specific? And again, curious to hear what the other board members have to say as well, because yeah, it was a long conversation.
I might suggest that Mark share.
Yeah, I froze, sorry.
Oh, sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in the information share, so the action sheet, it references, it should be noted that due to the framework for enhancing student learning and the ministerial order, the policy committee was careful to align the policy with the ministerial order. Specifically, it should note that some of the metrics of success are intended to align. And so I think that the discussion, the reason that there's the specificity and then a catch-all is for that very reasoning, because with the idea of having a strategic plan that doesn't align with the kind of requirements of reporting of the ministry, that was, I think, the basis of the recommendation there. So you'll see those areas of specificity and then a little bit more generic to include what the board's additional information the board would be seeking.
Steph, I see you have a comment, and then I have one too.
Yeah, so I guess I guess all of this could probably be framed in how different can it be after 30 days of consultation? One, because I'm happy to put this out to consultation and then just include my feedback and consultation process. But to the point that the Secretary Treasurer just made, the framework for enhancing student learning, all these types of things, they change as well. And the things that they ask for change as well. And I am really concerned that we don't have in there other things, particularly around a student achievement, that are not provincial assessment or provincially mandated things, because I think there's really rich data to be found in using our report card or our district assessment data, and in fact comparing those against FSA results. Wow, what a question. So I'm concerned about some of the things that I've seen here, but not like in a bad way, just in a can we keep mucking with it way. And I'm okay if we can keep mucking with it as a result of it coming back from consultation. And if that's what we want to do, I can support the recommendation, knowing that we still have a chance to muck with it, which is officially a governance term.
It actually is.
Maybe we want to take Greg's comment and then
I was just going to do that. Yeah, Greg.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Tanya, and I appreciate, and Shar, and I appreciate the comments from Stephanie as well. I think, you know, we did have a lot of discussion about this particular section, and I can see the points that have been made around specificity and making sure that there's different sources of data that are considered. And I guess it's trying to find that right balance where we list the known data sources and the ones that were advised align, but we also have the open-ended piece, which is the other applicable data. And the intent there, at least how I would see it, is it provides an opportunity for changing sources of data that might come along, you know, down the road after whatever after the policy is adopted. So from my perspective, I think it's good to have a level of specificity in the policy because it provides for consistency across boards. Because it is a little bit more challenging to amend a policy unless it's for good reason. So I like the idea of having a little bit more direction to help carry on the strategic planning process.
Chantel.
Thank you, Tanya. Oh, wow. Saying your first name in a public meeting. I like it. Yeah, I don't know that my comments would be too much different from Greg's comments. And, you know, but I did think I'd chime in on, you know, my recollection of how, you know, our conversations went and lead up to this document. And from my perspective, again, the sort of other considerations covers all, and sorry, I lost the document, so I'm not able to sort of refer directly to it. But what I recall is, you know, we wanted to stay away specifically in this from being overly general. Like, we actually wanted this to be effective in its purpose of being able to evaluate and show that we were maximizing on the strategic goals that were set out. And, you know, I would be satisfied to sort of let this go out for that consult and continue it in the, you know, as is, if that's the will of those who get the opportunity to look at it. So I'll stop rambling, but again, I don't see need for change at this point.
Okay, I'm going to go back to you, Stephanie, and then I'm going to, before I do that, is there anyone who hasn't spoken who would like to chime in on this subject? Okay, now you, Steph.
Thank you. So I appreciate, I think what I'm hearing is that, like, there's room to muck with it. And you know, one other thing that I felt I do feel a need to say publicly is under the process under B, it says B3 is a general framework for consultation with community, including rights holders. I think in you know, a district that has truth and reconciliation as a strategic goal, as well as an era of UNDRIP, that we actually should be seeking consent from our land-based nations on the approval of our strategic plan, which is you know, a different process and something that I think we should also muck with the thought around. What would that mean? What does that look like? What does it honor? So I'm just wondering, and then the last thing is, I really think, you know, we have under this list of monitoring evaluation, there are 6 things, and, you know, number 5 is anecdotal evidence of student success. So I think there's room in this list to add things that are critical. And I think report card data and district-wide assessment data is our district assessment data is critical. And if there's reasons why we can't utilize district assessment data that is created here by our teachers for our students, then we should be having that conversation as well. It's an important conversation. So what would be the process then for us as trustees? Is it now, is it being recorded, or should we be sending in like an email? How would we say, this is what I would like to see in it, to know that we could have an opportunity as a board to really debate these things? Because I think we're kind of, right now it's a bit procedural. We're debating whether it should go out, but I have some things that I feel very strongly should be included in it before it becomes approved. So I just want to know what the process would be, and then go from there.
Okay, I'm going to hand that back to you, Charlene, both as board chair and committee chair.
Thank you. So it's interesting, this conversation kind of came around, and I was also wanting to share a thought before I address what Stephanie was sharing. It is also possible for us to consider as a board, do we broaden the scope of a couple of these sections where it is specific in the duration or time frame, and within how we will review or what we will review, do we broaden it there and then look to a procedure about how staff will present information to the board? Because that would become something that's easier to change over time and be driven by, you know, it's still driven by what the board needs in order to assess. However, it's easier to change if, for example, FESL changes or something of that nature. So, you know, that is a consideration as well that the board could look at if they really did want to see changes to this section, instead of just adding to it, because I think we still end up in the same place where we add to it, but potentially we'll still miss something because lists are never perfect. So I put that out there for thought. My suggestion on moving forward tonight would be not to move the recommendation, but for us to consider the feedback that's been shared so far, to collect further feedback through email. The policy committee meets late next week, and we could contemplate what we've heard, what we'll get in through email, and then come back to the board later this month with another suggestion, whether that's to proceed with edits or whether that's, you know, an alternative based on the feedback that we receive. That would be my recommendation this evening based on what I'm hearing for feedback. I think it's important that we don't rush but pause to make sure that we're getting this right. So I leave that with the board.
Any comments on that? I tend to agree with that suggestion.
If I may, I put comment in the chat. I just my comment first off, I think in my desire for expediency, because it's getting towards the end of the night, I didn't give enough gratitude for this great work. So I do want to extend my gratitude. Sorry, I should have said that at the beginning, for this great work. And this is, I think, going to be really important work for the district going forward in terms of how a strategic plan can shape the direction of a district. In particular, shape how the district resources itself and how every single person in the district is, you know, paddling in the canoe going in the same direction. And so I think this is very critical work, and I think that's why I'm so concerned with getting it right. So I really appreciate the you know, being heard. I feel very heard, so thank you for that, and I appreciate making space for us to address these concerns first, and then also going out later and finding room to get this right, because I think it's really important. So thank you very much to everyone for the good work, and thank you for responding to my concerns.
Thank you. And Megan, I see you. You have a question that you'd like to ask?
I hope so, but Karen also responded and said no questions tonight.
Oh, well, no. Is this pertaining to the strategic plan debate discussion?
Yeah, I'm just curious. If I did have some feedback on the plan, am I allowed to provide that, and who do I send it to?
I'm going to leave that with you, Charlene.
Thanks. So you're welcome to share here, or by all means, my email is open and I can take that back to the policy committee, which actually might be most beneficial. If you have feedback to share, then if you could email that directly to me and I can take that to the committee next week, that would be very helpful.
Awesome. Thank you, Charlene.
You're welcome.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll do that, and and we'll bring it back to the board with some more thought. Thanks.
Jessica, I see you have a comment.
I was just writing, okay, never mind, because Charlene had ended it.
Oh, okay.
But so Stephanie brought up a really big conversation, and that would be decision-making processes that are respectful of rights holders and Indigenous communities in a colonial system, which we are. And I just want to kind of like, that felt like something really huge just got dropped and we didn't really acknowledge it. And not to say that, Charlene, I know you're not ignoring this, because I know we talked about it today, actually. But since it was brought up, and since it was brought up publicly, I just want to acknowledge that that conversation was introduced. You know, we need some advice about how to go forward on that. And I also think that we need some, you know, not just advice about how to do it. Oh gosh, how to do it. But the acknowledgement that we are an elected government in a colonial system, and that's the system and how it's run and how it's designed. And from a legal perspective, what information do we need to know? So I want to say that's a really, really big conversation. What I'm happy to engage in. I don't know that that is something that we will get answers immediately with regards to this particular policy, but just to, given that it was brought up, to acknowledge that the immensity of that conversation, glad that, you know, fine, I'm happy to have that conversation. Charlene, I know you are too. How we do that, great, we can discuss, but I don't know that can be resolved in time for this particular policy. So I literally don't know, and I need some advice on that. So I guess since it was brought up, you know, we can continue that conversation about how to have that. I just said have a conversation about how to have a conversation, but I think it's really big, and I think we need to explore it, and I think we need some advice. And so I just kind of wanted to acknowledge, I didn't want to gloss over it, that's all.
Thank you. That's a very well stated. You're absolutely correct. I'm gonna take a breath here. I apologize, friends, if I've been a little off tonight. My hip has been becoming progressively more sore as the night has gone on. Anyways, so we have no unfinished business. We have no questions from the audience. So barring anything further, I will call for a motion to adjourn. From Stephanie. I need a seconder. Yes. And Elaine. Anyone opposed to adjournment? Okay. Thank you all for your presentations tonight and for all of your work. And we look forward to seeing you next time.